is ask yourself the question, how are you going to feel after 10 seconds? How are you going to feel after 10 minutes? And how are you going to feel after 10 days? So you're going to make a decision, right? So how are you going to feel after 10 seconds? How are you going to feel after 10 hours, 10 days? Choose your metric if you like. But ask yourself those questions
Yeah.
because the answer is often different for each one. And it allows you to just pause for a moment.
We have serial world championship qualifier Chris Recchia on today on the podcast. And we're going to chat a little bit about mental resilience, a little bit about his sporting career, yes, but how that intertwines with his military past and his work life as well. There are so many interesting, fascinating parts to Chris's story that you can all take something from. Um, so let's get into it. Chris, tell us about some of those sporting accolades that you've collected over the years.
Well, firstly, thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be on the podcast and sharing the story. Yeah, I mean, from a triathlon perspective, Grant, got into it pretty late. I wish I'd got into it earlier as a younger athlete, younger guy, 18, 19 years old, but I didn't. I only got into the sport 6 or so years ago, having seen Fran, my wife, get into it, and I was kind of inspired by that and got stuck in. And since then, yeah, I've focused on long distance, really. Full Ironman is my better distance, but also do the 70.3s as well. I figure I kind of always need the longer distance to kind of make up for my poorer swim and catch people up on a bike in a run. So I've always focused on the longer distance, but I think also naturally, mentally, the way I'm wired, that longer distance chimes with me better. And I think we'll talk about it a bit later on today in terms of how uh, that distance, that challenge, and everything that an Ironman or a 70.3 triathlon presents actually chimes loads with other aspects of life. And I've spent 25 years in industry, and before that, 15 years in the military, and seen quite a bit of stuff. And the parallels between endurance sport and what we all do in life and outside of triathlon, there are some real parallels that I think we'll be able to tease out during today's podcast and talk about.
Yeah, in a previous episode we've just done on mindset of racing and endurance sport, we talked about everything from race nerves, preparation, confidence, execution. But I think what we were keen to do today was like take this a step further. And when you approached us, and I got to read your story in depth. It's actually left me like super excited about today's conversation. So maybe as we go into this, maybe just tell us, who is Chris Recchia?
Yeah.
Just give us a little bit more about the person
Yeah.
behind the story we're about to hear.
So it's pretty unextraordinary, a normal kind of guy. We live in Yorkshire, born and bred. Sport has always been a big part of life, along with family and what have you. In those early years, I had loads of influence from an Italian grandmother who used to feed me loads and loads of pasta and like I had pasta for breakfast kind of thing. So was always good at kind of fueling and getting things inside my body. Uh, it was great as a kid and like I say, born and bred in York and went to school in York and wasn't particularly academic. Could I have pushed harder? Probably, but I didn't. What was weird was when I was about 14, and this happens to a lot of people. I appreciate my parents split up and divorced, and that became one of the first moments where something that happened to you in life forced a decision and a choice. And that was one of my first ones. And I found myself at a bit of a crossroads where 14 years old, between 14 and 16, to mature as a young man and all the challenges that come with those years and parents separated and all of that sort of stuff, and had started my A levels but wasn't particularly enjoying it, and like I say, wasn't particularly academic, but decided to take a different route. And at 16, I joined the army, Phil, having walked down the road from school, much to my parents' displeasure, and signed up.
Yeah, I mean, I totally, I think a lot of people, as you said, can resonate with, divorced parents and things like that. When I read your piece, actually, very, very similar story to mine, and definitely a pivotal moment, probably in the person you become, and you trace a lot of things back to one of the first major moments in your life. Sadly, for a lot of people, that's one of them. But as we'll hear from you, these things that they shape you, and your choice what they make you become, isn't it? And the pasta for breakfast thing, I'm having that. I'm going to start tomorrow. So
Yeah,
sounds brilliant.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like this resilience had to start even before your military days.
Yeah, I think it. I think it did, Phil, and I probably didn't realise that until many, many years down the road. But it did, and that resilience and the building of resilience, the building of mental strength, definitely started earlier than I thought. And I often say to people, people assume that resilience appears in big dramatic moments, whether it's on a battlefield or whether it's in a boardroom, or in fact on a finish line, or as part of a big endurance Ironman type sport. But in my experience, resilience and mental strength actually begins much earlier than that. And often when things don't go well, and often when people are just not watching what you're doing, that's when resilience really does start. So not in those big moments, but in all of those quiet moments, way, way, way before you get to the
I'm assuming that took you quite a while to fully unpack and understand. And I think it'd be worthwhile to go through the story a little bit and, understand those pivotal moments and almost come back to that point where you're 16, 17 years old and you made that decision to join the military. Perhaps to somebody that can't relate to that decision, very fortunate enough to have grown up in a time where Britain had been, largely safe. The decision to join the military was one that seemed a way, way over there for somebody like myself. But it's always struck me as a decision that sounds quite scary. Perhaps not to be taken lightly. And as a 17-year-old kid, was there much? What was the thought process behind that, if you remember? Or was it largely just, I don't know, naivety, or where were you at that point?
I think the truth, you're absolutely spot on, Grant. I mean, it takes years and years to realize why you actually made a decision in the first place. And it's taken me a lot of time to kind of unpick all of that and realize that actually I was probably running away from something and looking for stability in something that wasn't there in that moment. And the option of joining the military and pursuing that as a career, coupled with the timing piece, i.e., parents divorcing, not enjoying school, and all that sort of stuff, all conspired together to create like the perfect storm, the perfect conditions that go, that's what I'm going to do. So did I ever think it through and have a master plan? 100% no. I didn't have that big grandiose plan, and I didn't know really what I was doing, and probably didn't have a view as to what the next 18 months even looked like, if I was brutally honest. Luck plays a part, but the harder you work, as people say, the luckier you get, and so on and so forth. And I did make that choice, and I decided to join, and those at the time, those were the reasons. And actually, I'll never look back and go, I wish I'd never done it. I absolutely think it was the best thing I did, and it actually defined me in the end. And I was able to, forge something out of, not a great time, if that makes sense, as a young boy.
Chris, you mentioned like resilience being developed in everyday moments, that kind of thing. And just, and this podcast is resilience and mental strength. Just talk us through the difference between those two things.
Yeah, I've kind of thought about this a lot, Phil, and I think there's a distinction between the two. When you hear people talk about resilience, they often think of like pushing through as a phrase, or not giving up, or keep going when things get hard, those types of phrases. And yes, that is definitely part of it, but it's, in my mind, only half of the story, really. What sits under resilience really is mental strength. So in my mind, resilience is what you do, what people can see. Mental strength is what you think and how you think as a person. And I've, over the years, started to differentiate, decouple the two, and create that distinction.
Yeah, so it brilliantly explained, and I think this is something that I wouldn't think many endurance sports athletes differentiate the two things. They just think of the struggle and that they've got to get through it. And actually, being able to pull these two things apart as we go further through your story and this podcast is sort of the key to maybe unlocking some new potential in people. And certainly, and this, as this won't just be about how do we use your story into the endurance sports world. When I've been through all of this, I went through that, and then I started taking your story and going back to the everyday world. So people will be able to take a lot out of this from a life point of view. So yeah, you joined the army, as a young man. So just take us forward
Yeah.
from there.
Yeah, so I was 16, February 1989, joined the army as a young soldier. Training was relentless, as you'd expect, physically exhausting, as you'd expect, mentally demanding, and frankly, a shock to the system. And the comforts of home life and everything else evaporated pretty quickly when I was 16 and a half in a very real world environment all of a sudden. And like most people thrust into that kind of environment, there were moments where I genuinely questioned myself. What am I doing here? Am I capable of this? Is this even right for me? But something becomes obvious very quickly, and the real battle isn't always external. It's internal. And there was that voice, and we've all had and heard that voice in our heads, and it was, this is too hard, you're not ready, stop. Conversely, it would say, no, you can do this, and you've got this covered, and you're capable to do this. So I was quickly learning in that military environment, Phil, that I had to develop that resilience, but I also had to develop that mental strength, and I had to decide how I was going to respond to that voice, whether that voice was being negative or whether that voice was actually being positive as well. But that voice was talking to me, and it's like, okay, how am I responding to this?
So when you're in those hard moments, when you're in, I don't know, some stressful, pressure-ridden situation, you've got potentially the good voice telling you, you've got this, you've done this before, you've done something similar in training. You've got the bad voice that says, run away. This is scary, this is terrible. What is the thought process? What does your head do? How does it take in all this information and create an output, whether that's the correct output or the wrong output? But how do you go about discerning how to take that next step? Once you've listened to the voice, how do you take the next step?
So I think the first part of the answer, Grant, is that one thing that I've certainly learned, and maybe even observed with people, is that many people wait for motivation, and there's no doubt that motivation can help you. It can help you in the circumstances we're talking about here, or it can help you as an athlete. But motivation can be a double-edged sword as well, and motivation can be unreliable as well, and it can come and it can go. And so the building of that mental strength and the resilience is the tool that you can use when it does get hard, and when that motivation leaves you, and when you haven't got the motivation. So when you keep showing up, even if you don't feel like it, over time, resilience, mental strength becomes the discipline that we often talk about in training and endurance sport, that carries you through. And again, to take it a stage further, that discipline turns into the resilience that we're talking about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it feels massively relevant for endurance athletes. That these things. I guess it's a circular thing that over time they all feed into each other. But motivation, I think, is. I think a lot of people think of motivation as I'm motivated to train at the moment, but motivation comes from. I think people can be massively more motivated at the start of a race than at the end of a race. When the chips are down, when it gets tough, that kind of thing. It's that circular thing, isn't it? It's the way you think, the mental strength, the how you're then going to battle through, which is the resilience, and that leads to actually remotivating yourself in the moment as well when things are tough. So it's not just. I guess it's a very in the moment thing as well as a general feeling of how you are towards your training and racing when we're talking about athletes.
Something that I've found more recently in my journey, I guess, through life, is that when I was an athlete competing, I found it quite easy to push, found it quite easy to move forward, found it quite easy to stay the course. Over the past months, started to kind of get back into running, and I found that really, really challenging. I found it very easy to listen to that voice to say, it's okay for today. You can chill out. You can let the runner go up ahead. You can do this. Are there any moments that you can kind of look back on, going back through the years where you found that kind of mental strength or the resilience leave you a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, Grant. There's a lot of things that I look at myself, and there's a lot of things that I don't have, and I am not the most naturally talented person at all. There's always someone that's more talented than you, and even got better skills and everything else. But where I was able to progress, certainly at this stage, and certainly in the army, and transcended into triathlon as well, was that I was able to progress because you kept on showing up. You had the discipline to keep on showing up. You might not have been the best person in the platoon or what have you, but you kept showing up, and that discipline started to take hold. And certainly in the kind of triathlon space, it's like I hate it when I kind of miss a session or what have you, because that discipline thing just kicks into me all of the time, and that can be a double-edged sword in itself, as we all know. But it's like keep showing up. But I'd also like to draw out another point actually, which is in all of this, there is failure as well. You get things wrong, you fall short. I, for certain, have failed loads of times at all kinds of different things in the military, in industry, and of course in sport and endurance in the triathlon and Ironman kind of space. But what I've always found is that those failures become the defining moments for you, and those failures are always, on reflection, far more important than any of the successes. And those failures and those learnings from those failures then start to tie back into this core thread that we're talking about around resilience and mental strength. And you then start to bolt on, well, I got this wrong or I failed at that, but what did I learn from it? Makes you stronger. And as what people say, isn't it? It's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It was like failure became an important part and an important learning as well in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, for athletes, setbacks are inevitable, aren't they? And we're obviously hearing here that failure, you can't see it in the moment, but with hindsight, we can all look at bad years of training, bad races, failure in other aspects of life, as you're talking about here, and very difficult moments in your life as well that handled in the correct way actually lead to growth and probably quite holistic growth. I do think sport is a bit of a vehicle for life as well. I think it feeds into everything. So failure in sport is I think teaches you a lot about other aspects of life and vice versa. So yeah, and I think it's so hard for us as coaches dealing with athletes with failure, because in the moment it's so difficult. The one thing coaches can do is they always have a longer lens on it immediately than the athlete. They've been there, they've experienced it, they've seen it with loads of other athletes, and they've always seen the bounce back and they've always seen the result of it. I was talking to an athlete yesterday about very similar thing and trying to talk about, how, someone that took failure very, very hard, younger guy, doesn't have the benefit of hindsight. So yeah, and it sounds to me like failure in various aspects of your life as well as life challenges was very defining for you, Chris.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's just so important to allow yourself to recognize that, and allow yourself to embrace the positives that invariably come out of it. It's by no means negative. And you talk to you'd read and watch all these top sportsmen all over the world, and the first thing that they'll say is that their most defining moments were their failures, not necessarily all of their successes. Yeah.
Do you have any examples of those moments of failures that you managed to learn from?
I think the first big moment, like when I kind of got out of basic training, it was the early 1990s, and I was immediately deployed to the first Gulf War. For those that will remember it, I was just 18, so I was just legally allowed to go, and I found myself in the middle of Iraq at 18 years old, and all of a sudden everything changes, because now the pressure is real, the stakes are high, and the fear is a tangible thing. It's real. It's not. We're not joking here. It's happening. One of the biggest lessons that I kind of learned from that period was that resilience, mental strength doesn't remove fear, but it does reframe it. And fear doesn't mean that you should stop. Fear means you should focus on what's in front of you. And I think those are real important things, and they definitely transcend into our sport.
It's a really powerful distinction you're making there, Chris. Obviously, athletes get nervous before races, and how they interpret that can be so important. I mean, how do you think athletes should think about nerves or fear before a race?
I personally think that fear is normal. Fear can be a strength. Pressure means that something matters to you. And I don't think you should fight those nerves. I think you should embrace them, like we're talking about, and reframe them as focus, and use them so that you become more ready. Definitely shouldn't, in my mind at least, suppress them. Because then you're losing out on a really powerful tool that, as an athlete, you can draw on. So it's like, in those quiet moments, maybe at the start of a big race or a swim, use those nerves in those moments to even start the conversation with yourself before it even gets hard. Have the bravery to start the conversation with yourself as you put in your swim cap on or whatever. Don't wait for it to happen. Have the conversation early. Sounds a little bit weird, doesn't it? But it's. I think it's normal, and I think we should embrace those fears, that uncertainty, or whatever it is that hits you as an individual athlete when you're about to start something big.
I mean,
I think that's
athletes in a way are already. If we break this back down to what you said earlier about mental strength being what you think and resilience being what you do, no one stood on the start line of an Ironman not thinking about something, but I like and the resilience actually is there, because the next thing they do is they go and dive in the water. Very few actually walk off that start line because they're so scared that they can't go through with it. But what you're saying there is that what that self-talk is, what that mental strength is, that's what you can build upon, probably do a much better job of your own self-talk, and it starts on the start line. It probably starts a few days before. And if you accept that you're going to dive in that water at the start anyway, you're resilient enough. And yeah, I guess what I'm trying to do, this is learning from me, the way you've broken this down. I just like to use some practical examples for athletes of it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think mental strength is a very personal thing, Phil, but I also think that resilience can be a collective thing. And you mentioned the start line, and you think about the energy on some of those start lines, and everybody's within their own thought, but they're all thinking largely the same thing. And so resilience can be a collective thing. But as you say, I think it's in those moments where you want to rely on your training, you want to rely on trust, and rely on the people around you, the people that have helped to get you to that point, or the people that are going to be out there cheering you on. Or in that military context, you're relying on the guy next to you to do his job or her job, and training, trust, people, all things that tie into one's ability to build that resilience.
I really liked what you said earlier about not suppressing the fear and, in fact, listening to it and letting it come in. And the way my mind went was, do you think that is in part perhaps the reason that, I've seen it before in races in the sporting context where it's happened to myself, frankly, where there's a freeze, there's a panic, and that fear becomes crippling in a way. Yes, you can maybe do the thing, you can step forward, but perhaps not in the way that your training would show, or past experience would show. Do you think that is a suppression of listening to the fear?
Yeah, I think you run a real risk, Grant, when you try to suppress that fear, because I think it can come and bite you, and you do need to listen. You do need to listen to it and embrace it, so that you can. It's back to that internal conversation with oneself. So you can have that conversation with yourself and actually rationalize what's going on. And I think we've seen it with current pros in the sport, where for whatever reason their ability to make decisions inside a race leaves them. So I think you should never suppress it. I think you can help yourself as well, though, by keeping things really simple and cutting out all of the decisions that don't make decisions on the day. Try not to have to make decisions in a race, and it's the same. It's the same in the kind of military context. However, be prepared to change the plan if you need to, because if something comes up against you, you're going to have to think it through, and you're going to have to modify. You're going to have to change, and that's okay as well. But do it in a calm, logical manner, so that you're not flapping around. And certainly, the military side of things brought into the sport thing. I know that one is for fun and one can be very serious, but actually, it's always been a useful tool for me to keep calm, even when everything else around you is starting to kind of unravel a bit, and just pause if you need to, and then work your way through the problem. And again, it just brings another string to that resilience bow when you can do that. And certainly the military stuff transcended into the sport in that sense, for sure. And you know what, also, don't take it too seriously either. Accept that you've got the privilege of being there, doing what you're doing, and if it doesn't quite go to plan sometime, then That's okay. Don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah. There's a couple of things spring to mind here. First of all, I remember when I first read your bio, actually, you talked about yourself a little bit in that, and you talked about decision making and actually how you've over time, through all of everything you've been through, everything you've learned and observed very well from it by the looks of it, that you're very good at actually like quietly absorbing all of the information around you and bring it and then making a decision and just going with it. And you just elaborate on that a little bit more, because I think, yeah.
So there's a couple of things there. Phil. So after the Gulf War, I was actually posted to Germany. I went back to Germany. I got promoted somehow, and then got asked if I'd go to Sandhurst. And I went to Sandhurst, where I went through all of my officer training, and then things changed again, because it wasn't just about me; it was about others as a leader. As a leader, your mindset becomes visible to others. So if you lose control, others feel it. If you stay composed, others find confidence in your approach. So mental strength in leadership is all about controlling your response. And one of the tools that I often use, and it plays to your kind of leading question, was around. I used to use this tool called OODA, which was OODA, which was observe, orientate, decide, act. And then you'd do the loop again if you needed to. So you'd observe again, you'd orientate yourself, you'd decide what you're going to do, and you would act. And that OODA loop is something that I've used throughout life, in industry as well, and into sport. You're in a situation, you observe what's going on, you orientate yourself to it calmly, and you decide what you're going to do, and then you act. And that could be in any context. And I've always found it the most simplest of tools, but it's something that you can just pause and apply when you need to.
I think, I mean, I listen to that and I think about it from a business context, a life context, social skills, etc., all of those things. And I think I'm sure there's no one listening to this that hasn't hot-headedly replied to, I don't know, a WhatsApp or something when they wish they'd have done it a different way or whatever. But, bringing it into the sporting sphere, I think athletes think they're a F-15 fighter pilot, and there's got to be a split-second decision in the middle of a 10-hour Ironman because something's happened in front of them. And actually, whether that be a mechanical, a puncture, starting to feel, or they've dropped a bottle, or it doesn't take long, does it, just to step back, observe what's happened, or you're talking still seconds here, but and just allow yourself time to make the right decision. And yeah, I just wanted to. I didn't know whether we'd end up bypassing that, and it was just something when I read your bio, I sort of like thought it was to have put that in such a short piece about yourself, I thought was quite prominent.
Another way I've always looked at it, Phil, is ask yourself the question: how are you going to feel after 10 seconds? How are you going to feel after 10 minutes? And how are you going to feel after 10 days? When you're going to make, so you're going to make a decision, right? So how are you going to feel after 10 seconds? How are you going to feel after 10 hours, 10 days? Choose your metric if you like, but ask yourself those questions, because the answer is often different for each one. And it allows you to just pause for a moment. So to your example, you don't do the 10-second WhatsApp reply and go, maybe shouldn't have done that. You pause, because actually how you're going to feel in 10 minutes is different to how you're feeling right now. And it's a bit like, it might be tough in a race, right? And you go, I'm done with this, I'm going to stop. Well, how are you going to feel in 10 seconds? How are you going to feel in 10 minutes? How are you going to feel in 10 hours? Ask yourself those questions before you make the decision.
I've always had a similar thing. If it doesn't matter, if it's not going to matter in 4 weeks, then it doesn't matter now. And I've used that in lots of aspects of life to get through things that bother you in the moment. And if you just quickly step back and just check in with yourself, because we're all playing the long game, aren't we? I believe every dog has its day, and in all aspects of life, and it's you can be very reactive and very much so in the heat of sport. So yeah, fascinating. So you were back at Sandhurst at this point, and just
Yeah.
I think we're coming to some very interesting part of the story here. So I'll sort of let you take
Yeah.
it from here, maybe.
So graduated from Sandhurst, went back into kind of mainstream kind of officer work. I was commando trained. I'd done all of the commando courses down in Lympstone, got my green beret, all of that sort of stuff. Done all of the fancy parachuting and all of those different things. But along the way, I'd spent a first tour in Northern Ireland, and then I found myself back in Northern Ireland in 1997. This kind of part of the story is probably profound, hard, definitely a hard moment, but one that puts life completely in perspective, and allows you, or has allowed me through my life, to really ground myself in the right way, and do things for the right reasons. So it was February the 12th, 1997. I was doing a reconnaissance down in South Armagh, in Northern Ireland, famously known as Sniper Country. And I'd met this Lance Bombardier who was on a checkpoint just outside one of the army bases, and I was observing some of the stuff that they were doing. He was stood in the middle of the road. I was stood next to him. I just reached into my bag, my day sack, to get something out. And this 24-year-old soldier is shot, and he's shot by the IRA. One of the sniper teams shot him, and killed him there. And I was stood next to him, and it was profound because on one level, you act professionally. I'd spent a lot of time in the province before, so I knew what I was doing. You're dealing with the incident, and what have you. On the other hand, you're dealing with an extreme moment, not just for that individual, not just for me, not for the people around him, but politically it was massive. He was the last soldier to be killed in Northern Ireland by the IRA, and what followed was months and years of kind of chaos, calm, trust in training, reflection, talking, processing, learning. But experiences like that never leave you. This isn't some form of PTSD, by the way. It's like rarely does a day go by where I don't think about the guy. Some flashes in sometimes and you think. And the reason I include this in my kind of story is that from a military context, and it transcended into my industry and my work post my service, and then into sport, was that kind of moment. You learn so much from it, Phil, and you learn what's important, and you learn a bit about your emotions as well, and bringing it back to sport and triathlon and what we all love and do. It's amazing how you can use your emotions in such a powerful way, and I always mention that part of the kind of broader story because everybody's got probably more people than you think have got a similar, not maybe quite similar, but everyone's got something that's happened to them. Everyone's got a story. And my point here is that, again, it's like the fairground. You don't suppress it. Allow it to come out. There's certain things you can't change, but you can use them in a positive way and try for the greater good, as it were. That was an example that happened to me that I've always taken into different parts of my life, very, very quietly, because not everybody would have known about it then. It's always has been a strength. And what I'm saying here is that we all have those moments in life. We all have those difficult things. I'd always encourage people to think about how you use them, and don't let them define you. And use them in the most positive way that you possibly can. Positive action equals positive reaction. Negative action equals negative reaction. So the only thing you can be is positive. If you can take that into your workplace, if you can take that into sport, and you can be positive, you're going to get a positive reaction. Might not always go to plan, but you'll get a positive reaction on the whole.
Yeah, Chris,
Such
thanks for.
a
I mean, yes, thanks for
yeah,
sharing that.
such a powerful story there, Chris. Thank you very much. You're spot on. I think whilst probably thankfully few people can relate to your story, everybody has their own kind of 10 out of 10 moment, don't they? That
Yeah,
defines them
exactly.
in some certain way, and the message to have something positive come out of that that you can take with you and use as a strength.
Yeah, I think it helps you create that frame of reference for yourself as an individual, doesn't it? You know, it's like, yeah, this was really, really bad. So actually, getting a flat tire on an Ironman ain't so bad, you know. Uh, yeah, and I'm not belittling one or the other, but it gives you that frame of reference so that you can operate in the way that you want to operate and perform in the way that you want to perform.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you talk about like resilience in the moment is one thing. Resilience over time is something else. Being able to separate those two things and using those big 10 out of 10 experiences, as Grant calls it, to understand the difference between the two. But thinking about resilience over time, because I do believe, again, as we relate this back to athletes, this is being resilient over time, having discipline over time, all of these things are so important because it's skin in the game that gets you good. And give us some examples, of sort of like what you mean about resilience over time.
Yeah, I think you have to allow yourself to revisit those difficult things, whatever that difficult thing was, and you should revisit it, and you should not try and process it just once and then it be done with. Reprocess it and process it again and process it again, and over time you accept what's happened, and then you start to form better ways of how you would deal with things in the future by reprocessing things. And reflection matters because it allows you to learn. And if you learn, you can then move forward. And in the context of triathlon and racing and everything else, we can all do that race, reflect on what went well, reflect on what didn't go so well, revisit it and process it. And I think that allows you to do that bit of learning, and then you move forward, and ultimately one hopes you get better, right? And you get better when you do it the next time, and the time after that, and the time after that.
One of the things that kind of struck me with your story, and perhaps in some ways counters a little bit of what you speak about, resilience over time, that kind of mental strength of pushing through, continuing to show up, continuing on the road, on the journey. But evidently you reached a point in your military career where, you transitioned out of it and into civilian life. Perhaps part of that with the mentality of resilience and, and pushing through, it would have been an easier decision to continue with the military or some work in that line. What was that process like, and how did you kind of delineate that decision-making process?
Well, to lighten the load a little bit, I'd met Fran at this point, so that kind of dictated the idea that I would leave the military, and the transition from the military into business, and that's what happened. And so I left Grant in 2001, having served for that kind of 13 years. Ireland wasn't just the place; had been in the Middle East and in lots of different places, and I left in 2001, entered into the business world and joined Arthur Andersen at the time, that later became Deloitte, so one of the major Big Four professional services firms. Bearing in mind, I'd left school at 16. Everybody that joined those firms were top 1-2% graduates, leaving universities, highly educated, and here's Chris coming in as an analyst, and I knew nothing. And so I had to figure out how to transition some of that military stuff into business. And so I was starting again. It was a new environment, new expectations, new challenges, and I had to press the reset button and start again and go again in a different environment entirely to what I had been used to, uh, which is where the basics of resilience, mental strength, keeping it simple, the OODA loop that I mentioned earlier, observe, orientate, decide, all came into play again. And I was able to transition and, in short, spent 25 years in industry as a partner in Deloitte, for 15 years of that, which was a high pressure environment. And it kind of overlapped with then getting into the triathlon, and then that's where the discipline came in, because I'd do 15-hour day down in London, back up to Yorkshire, get on the turbo, do it again on the Tuesday and on the Wednesday, and the discipline thing started to play a part. And I think the key point for athletes out there is that I think you can 100% have that really big job and that big responsibilities and everything else outside of triathlon, and still be able to apply yourself and be disciplined to do that, and achieve and be successful in that kind of triathlon space to whatever level you want to take it to. And it all chimed with the need to be resilient. And much in like my military career, Grant, the business career was filled with highs, it was filled with lows, it was filled with lessons, it was filled with failures, it was filled with successes, like we all experience. The point here for me was that, yeah, you can have both, you can do both if you want to, in terms of the triathlon stuff, as well as being committed to high powered, high profile job.
Yeah, I think you just talking about you talk about failure within the business world, which we've already spoke about failure, but we'll sort of go back to it now with you talk a little bit about failing a director assessment, I think it was. And I think it's
That
got
was
really
it.
really good parallels, especially on the timeline it took to overcome that with people and racing.
Yeah. So I'd progressed through the firm, Phil. I got to senior manager. You then get asked if you want to try and become a director, and the stage after that is then partner in the firm, an owner in the firm. But before you get there, you've got to get to the director level, and you go and you do these like 2 day director assessments, and I completely bombed it. Didn't get it right, failed it spectacularly. I mean, the good news was at least I failed it badly. I didn't just miss it. I properly got
Not like fourth place.
it wrong. Yeah,
Yeah, you weren't
yeah,
not like just one off
yeah,
the podium. You were at the
yeah.
back of the field.
I
Yeah.
was like at the back of the group, yeah. And it was like, it was just another one of those life moments where you have a choice, and it's like, what are you going to do? And it was either like, okay, do you walk away from this because you've got as far as you're going to go, or do you go back to that kind of resilience piece, that reflection piece, and do you learn to listen to what you've been told, change, and then pivot and grow differently? So I decided not to give up, and I chose to take on board the feedback, and give it another shot. A year later, I was promoted to director, and then 2 years after that, was promoted to equity partner in the business. So I think I think you're going to draw some parallels here now, because it's like there is so much parallel there with some of the sports stuff.
I mean, even just the people. This sport, races are full. You want you might have to wait another year to get another bite of the cherry, and with Ironman racing especially, it's one or two bites of the cherry a year for most people. One. And if you get it wrong, it feels like a long wait. But with the advantage of hindsight, you've got a year of time to take on that feedback from a coach or training partners or whatever. And I think that, there is a point there as well. I think for coaches listening to this, I think you have to say it how it is sometimes, and give people like the hard truth sometimes. If something they've done in training is leading to them not accomplishing what they want, or maybe their goals are too high based around lifestyle. And that's not to say they can't get there. Maybe it's a lifestyle adaptation. Like you said, 15-hour days in the office, you're still on the turbo at night. And look, that's a whole other rabbit hole we could go down as to whether this is a good or bad thing. But the right person, can succeed in many areas. So, and I'm sure that in a big way is down to mindset and resilience. So yeah, I just thought that that is a really like relevant part of your journey through the business world.
Yeah, and
Brilliant.
sorry, go on, Grant.
No, on you go, Chris.
I was just going to say, again, it's like failures shouldn't be failures shouldn't define you. Failures, but failures can be your defining moment, if that makes sense. So don't be afraid of failure and everyone going, you know, "Oh, you failed." Well, you know, we create this mirage or whatever you want to call it around failure, don't we? And everyone protects themselves from failure, but sometimes it's actually, and that's culturally in our country. I think we don't look or like failure, but it should never. I think we should allow ourselves to kind of get it wrong sometimes, because it doesn't define you, but it can be a very defining moment. And in the future, you often look back, don't you, and go, well, actually, I learned the most when it went wrong, not when it went well.
I just draw some quick parallels here with, instead of sport, actually total try training as a business. You know, we've been 11 or 12 years in business this year, and on the outside, we look like we've been a fairly big success as to what we've done. The amount of failure, the amount of things we've done that haven't worked, far outweigh everything that's worked, and
Yeah.
it's still happening to today. You know, you do have to become resilient to failure, and just see it as part of the process, and it's okay. Because I guess looking back, you know, did failing that director assessment, do you think that made you a better director in the end?
And like, not just for me, but for those people around me, for those people that I then helped mentor, the people that I helped come through their careers. Because I'd failed, I knew what it felt like. I knew what you needed to achieve. And as a consequence, the advice that you give was gold dust to those people going through it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, because they actually believed what you were saying. Because you could say, I bombed it. I failed, but this is what you can do, and this is how you can be successful, irrespective of that afterwards. And so it wasn't just about you as an individual; it's about all of those people around you as well that you could help.
Yeah, I just got off on a little tangent here about failure. So this again came from a conversation yesterday, but it takes me back to working with a very good athlete I work with. He's one of our coaches actually. He came to me with he wanted to train on the bike in a certain way a couple of winters ago, and I sort of listened to his rationale behind it. And you know, there's a lot of emotional attachment to your own training, isn't there? It's one of the, you know, advantages of having someone in your corner. And you know, I could see it was being driven by desire rather than, you know, maybe being practical about it. But I could see that, you know, the fire was there, and I went with it. I knew it was going to fail, but I knew he had to try. It was part of, I saw it as part of a learning process, you know, not just as an athlete, but as a coach. And it was a nuanced thing. It was just a little thing, but it was just going to tip the scales slightly the wrong way. But I thought the only way to do it was to allow some failure within a controlled atmosphere, you know, and it was in the autumn, heading to Christmas period of the year. I knew there was time to bring it back round, but it was actually one of the pivotal points in a journey that now sees him at the level he wants to be at on the bike. And the learning he got, I just don't think he could have learned any better. And nothing I could have said would have taught him better than learning for himself. So, you know, and I'm not saying we set athletes up for failure very often. It just sprung to mind there that was one of the cases where sometimes a little bit of failure does people some good. It's just a very hard thing to manage as a coach, because you've then got to deal with the fallout of it and turn it around. But it's one of the most powerful tools, I think.
I think the sport is definitely a playground for that, isn't it? I mean, you can fail again and again and again, and it doesn't really matter, right? Yes, you might feel a little bit hurt at the time, but in the grand scheme of most people's lives, it is only a part of it. I actually think it's brilliant being a beginner at something again and learning about a new sport, a new challenge that you're rubbish at, and you know you will repeatedly fail at over and over again, just for the joy of progressing, because you need that failure in order to progress. Looking back a little bit, then, Chris, you know, you started off, as you said, as a 17, 18-year-old kid, 16, 17, joining the military. You got promoted through the ranks. You then started again in business. You got promoted through the ranks. You have subsequently done well in triathlon and sport. But I guess from a military and a business perspective, those promotions have been at the behest of another person. Another person has made that decision to promote you.
Yeah.
What is it you think that multiple people, many people over many years of saw in you, and what can we take from that in order to go through that ourselves?
Gosh, that's a really, really, really good question, Grant. I'm not sure what people saw. I think, however, consistency, discipline, not necessarily being the best, but turning up with those attributes can outweigh an awful lot of other things. Underpin that with authenticity, and care. You actually care about what you're doing. You care about the people around you. You care about their success as much as your own. That I think people, that's what people take from it. So, yeah, if you were to put it into a Wordle kind of thing, I'd say, discipline, consistency, authenticity was some of the key pillars that I tried to major on, because I didn't have the education, I didn't have the O levels, I didn't have the A levels, I didn't have a degree. So I had to find something else. And those things were the things that I was able to actually be okay at. And
Grant,
again,
I
it
mean,
transcends into sport.
yeah, Grant, I mean, if you think about what Chris is saying there and think about the kind of athlete you like to coach, discipline, consistency, authenticity, they might not have a sporting background, they might not have a VO2 in the 80s, but, the attributes of people that in the end get where they want to get to, and that they are a joy to coach and they are highly coachable. I imagine the way you sort of talk there, Chris, you must be highly coachable. You must be a joy to coach, for you just knowing you're going to get it done. You're going to show up. You're going to give everything. Yeah, some really good traits that you've obviously carried over from life and the business world into how you are as an athlete.
And I've always said, like, keeping it simple, not overcomplicating things, has always helped me. Whether it's in the military, industry, or sport, keep it simple. Like going into transition on the morning of the race, don't be there making a decision as to whether you're going to put sleeves on or a jacket. Go with the decision you made the night before. You might be a bit cold, but
Yeah. So look, you obviously transitioned. Well, not transitioned. You inspired by Fran, your wife, who
yes.
now has been a very big success as a coach within Total Try. Hence the connection to yourself, and you were inspired into, I guess, Ironman. And
Yeah.
it probably aligns very well with your tenacity, I guess. Such a big, hard endurance sport. But yeah, what's it taught you?
Yeah, I think on one level, Phil, the sport just chimes with me personally. I think people talk about trauma, don't they? And they talk about endurance sport, and they talk about characters, in our sport who've experienced trauma, and then they bring it onto or into the race. You often hear that parallel, don't you? Maybe there's a little bit about that for me, but fundamentally, I think it's like, I love the sport because you can't fake it. You have to put the work in, and ultimately, it's blooming hard, isn't it? We might normalize some of it over time, but it's very difficult, and ordinary isn't enough. And at some point, it's going to get hard, and you're going to get tired, and you're going to have low points. And it's when your body and your mind start negotiating with each other. That's the part that I think I like, because that internal conversation that you have with yourself in that race, that's the part that seems to draw me into the sport. You love the crowds, you love everybody shouting for you and all of that sort of stuff, but it's the internal conversation that I have with myself when it starts to get a little bit difficult. I've personally always enjoyed that, and the recognition of knowing that the only person getting you around that course is you. There's going to be a load of people shouting for you, but they ain't going to get you around the course. It's what's going on in your mind, your resilience, your mental strength that will ultimately get you round. And navigating not just the physical course, but the mental course that's going on in your head whilst you're going through the swim, going through the bike, going through the run, and all that comes with it. That's the part I love, I think. And I've always enjoyed that bit, weirdly. But I love that conversation.
One of the tricks I try, maybe it's not a trick, but one of the tools I try and get my athletes to do is to think about some of those conversations ahead of time. What is that the devil in your shoulder going to say to you? What are the kind of things that it's going to try and trip you up with, to get them to prepare answers ahead of time instead of thinking about them when their heart rate's at 180 and they've just ran past their hotel room. What are some of your answers?
I think in those moments, Grant, I think it goes back to that conversation we had around suppression and actually not suppressing the conversation. Make sure you have that conversation, because otherwise those excuses are going to fill up the bag pretty quickly and you'll be able to pick them out really fast. So have the conversation with yourself. And when it gets hard, I think Phil, I remember you shouting at me in Bolton once. It's like, just keep it all under control. And it's like, keep it under control, stay composed, don't panic and keep moving. And those things sound so simple, don't they? But like you say, Grant, when your heart rate's going through the roof and, you've got no fluid left inside you, you make silly choices. And so that internal dialogue, composure, not panicking are like really key things. And I think you then start to find a way, don't you? And you work your way through that conversation with yourself. And I think that's what makes the end of a race, I think, so special for the individual, is because they've been able to navigate not just a physical course, but they've navigated an internal, hard mental conversation with themselves over many hours in order to achieve something extraordinary. And that's kind of special.
So a lot of us are going to Bolton 70.3 this weekend and will be on course side. And, I've been course side to some very extreme events over the years, things like UTMB, crewing for people on that. And it's the same in all iron distance racing. As a coach, you appreciate what someone is going through. Exactly this. They are when they're struggling. Sometimes the day is going great and you can tell someone's in a great place and you just encourage that great place. But for a lot of people, it gets hard late on. And actually, rather than shouting and screaming at the side of the course, I think trying to say a little something that just sits in their brain that helps them over the next few miles of the run, or something that pulls them back round in a aid station 60 miles into an ultra in the Alps, or I'm just talking from experiences I'm thinking about here, but those little things, you might not think much of what you've said at the time, but sometimes it's enough to just flick something inside that athlete's head that can get them back into thinking about their mental conversation. And it could be that at the time they think you said that to them, but actually all you did is remind them of something that they couldn't quite think of in the moment because they're so fatigued. And I think that's a key role of a coach on race day, actually. A coach or a crew or a support crew, or if you were the half racing or something like that, is just when you know someone well enough to just say something that gets those cogs whirring. So yeah, interesting as well that you talk about, it's this mental challenge that you nearly love as much as the physical as well.
Yeah, and it's like, whether it's the individual that gives it to themselves or whether somebody else gives it to the individual, but having that hook, that mental hook that you can hang yourself on when it gets tough, is a really great tool to have, isn't it? And it's like, it's getting hard, I'm going to hang myself on this hook and I'm going to keep going whatever the weather. That mental hook that you can hang off is a really powerful internalization thing, isn't it? Internal tool. Actually, it's actually a military concept. It's a military concept. You used to go through, I went through a couple of times where you do the whole resistance to interrogation, and it's a pretty traumatic experience. And they always say mentally, when you've got white noise, black goggles on, you can't see anything, and all you hear is white noise, you need a mental hook. Ironman's a little bit like that. You need a hook to hang yourself on when you're deep into that run. Puts you in a good place.
Grant, I think we've got a new training tool here: black goggles and white noise, and yeah, we could develop a team of really strong athletes here. So
yeah. Lawsuit.
We'll do it on one of next year's training camps. So that video will go viral, won't it? In fact, I think we should. Yeah. Look, we talked a little bit about nerves already. I guess just a reminder, thinking about, and there's a lot of racing on this weekend again, and just give us a little final takeaway on nerves for the day. What do people do this weekend when it's Friday and they're nervous? They sleep badly, for example, for 2 nights before the race because of nerves. How'd you cope with it?
So remember that the nerves are normal, and the nerves are a good thing. They create the pressure a little bit, but pressure means that it's meaningful. It matters to you, so that's a great thing. That those nerves, that pressure, that fear, even can sharpen your focus in a really positive way. Fundamentally, if you've missed that couple of good nights sleep beforehand, just remember that all of the preparation that you've done is going to be there for you on race morning, and trust that preparation, because what happens a couple of days before the race is not going to define the outcome for you, because you've already put all the work in already. So just believe in that, and go back to all of those hours that you have put in, and all of the work that you've done. And I think that's what then carries you through. And just once the gun goes off, those nerves are gone anyway, aren't they? It's literally a switch, isn't it? Once you're in that water.
It's such a crazy thing, that, isn't it? As soon as the gun goes, it just completely disappears, and that's you in the race. No, listen, Chris, I think that's been an absolutely amazing conversation. I really enjoyed reading about your story over the past couple of days, and even more so chatting to you. I think definitely a very inspirational character, and I'm sure our listeners will have taken a lot of little techniques, whether that's UDA or the difference between mental toughness and resilience, for sure. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and I'd say the same, Chris. That was fascinating from when I first got your sort of like your brief over, if you like. I was excited about talking about this, and just aligning these. Speaking openly, I have a few 10 out of 10 moments in my life that, I always lean back on to get perspective on things, to really understand what matters. But actually, I think this conversation today has really made me sort of reflect on how all of those things, they do make you resilient. But they don't necessarily, they give you a natural resilience over time, but I think the mental strength side of it is a heavily learnt thing. I think I've been lucky enough to be surrounded by people with good levels of mental strength that have been happy to share over the years their thought processes, whether that's in sport. I've had some good training partners, business partners, coaches around me now, that offer a lot of insight into that, and even this podcast. There's another big tick in the box for how I will go away and think about mental strength in the future. So I think it's been really a very real podcast, and thoroughly enjoyable to do, and I hope we sort of linked it back to sport enough for people, but that people can then go, hang on, this isn't just about sport, this is about life.
Yeah, 100%. And I'd just say, you don't need to eliminate doubt. You don't need to eliminate fear. You just need to learn to manage your thinking and trust yourself. Always keep moving forward, and never, ever, ever give up. And someone said to me once, the people that go the furthest aren't the ones that never struggle. they're just the ones that continue anyway. So, remember that when it gets a bit tough. And like yourself, Phil, we'll be up in Bolton and looking forward to seeing people toe the line and go for it, which is going to be amazing.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much.